One interesting trend we saw over the past few years, especially once the pandemic hit, is a lot of people took early retirement because it seemed like the right move at the time. Their stock market portfolios, their 401ks were soaring in value and still are in many cases, and said, you know what, I don't want to go back to the office, I don't want to deal with this stuff, let's just retire early and get out of it. And some people really had enough money to do that, but others didn't. And now what we're starting to see is a reversal where a lot of retirees are being forced to return to the workforce because the cost of living is going up so much right now. I talked to one lady who is trying to balance, being retired and watching the grandkids and hanging out with her family and still trying to live on the retirement budget, and she's going to have to go back to work now because it's just not possible to continue this lifestyle, it seems like. And she said she made a budget before she retired, and she's doing her best to stick with that retirement budget, but the problem is inflation and the cost of living is pushing her outside of that budget. Because think about it, guys, anybody who made a budget a couple years ago, even 2-3 years ago, that budget now has to be increased by 20 or 30% or more in some cases, depending on where you live and your lifestyle, in order to keep up with the increases. They talked to a retired teacher and a cop, and the retired teacher is now starting to take on side jobs tutoring in order to keep up with the rising cost of living. And keep in mind, the cop has a pension. So, even with a pension, in many cases not making enough to keep up, guys, unless the pension is just out of this world and you're making 6 figures a year with that pension, then you're probably going to be okay. They need to cover things like health insurance, they need money for increased cost of living, they need money for gas, groceries, utilities, car insurance, all this stuff that is going up faster than what people are bringing in. The reality is the average American has seen their yearly budget for just running a household go up between $10,000 and $12,000 over the past couple of years. Just according to the official numbers, inflation is up 19.4% since 2021, guys. So, and that's the official numbers. And we know that the official numbers are massaged and not very accurate. I've shown you guys some of the inflation charts from Shadow Stats and things like that that show you what the real inflation numbers would be today if they calculated it like they did in the 80s and 90s. And of course, it's always consistently higher. And the thing is, if it went up 19.4% with the official numbers, we could say it went up by almost double that, really, since 2021. So imagine a 40% increase in the average cost of living for people in the last 3 years. That is insane. Even these retirees are feeling it too. Like, even if you have a paid off house, right? That's like the number one goal for people going into retirement is I need to get my house paid off. So that way I don't have to worry about having a house payment in retirement. Housing is the number one expense that most people have, which is a logical thing to try to do. But even then, even once you have your house paid off, you're still dealing with increased property taxes, you're still dealing with increased homeowners insurance, and like for these retirees, they're talking about how every time I need to have something done with like the plumbing or an electrician come over, any kind of repair, it costs double what it cost me a few years ago, because the labor costs have also gone up tremendously as well. What seemed like a good idea to try to retire early and just get out of the workforce at a crazy time in the world is turning out to be not so ideal for people anymore. And we talked about this the other day, that the Fed's most recent household survey, 65% of households are saying that inflation has made their lives worse over the past couple of years. The only people who are benefiting from this are people who already own assets before the inflation took place and have been able to capitalize and benefit from the inflation. Because when you have high inflation like we did, then the more assets you own, the more you benefited from it. But that's a kind of a small percentage of the entire population who actually really benefited from it. And here's something interesting. When it comes to paying for life and just having money for things today and living comfortably, everybody's complaining about how expensive it is, right? But ironically enough, only 20% of Americans define being financially successful as being a millionaire. So You know, a lot of people would say being a millionaire is not even a big deal anymore because $1 million doesn't go nearly as far as it did even just a decade ago. So who cares if you're a millionaire? You kind of almost need to be a millionaire now just to live a comfortable life. But according to 80% of Americans, they don't think so. I mean, look how much $1 million has lost its purchasing power, guys. 50 years ago in 1974, $1 million would have the same purchasing power as $6 million today. That's how much value the dollar has lost in the last 50 years. I mean, that is horrendous. So 60% of Americans say that they would feel financially successful if they were able to live comfortably. Now, everybody's version of living comfortably is going to be different. You know, everybody has different standards of living and what they consider to be comfortable or not. But basically, the definition is that means you're able to afford day-to-day expenses while still putting money into savings. That's kind of like living comfortably. One way that people kind of look at this is if you make just a regular middle-class income and you have a strict budget and you save any amount of extra money you have, then somebody like that might feel more financially successful and secure than somebody who earns, you know, a several six-figure salary, but they have loads of debt to pay off each month. So this is why I always tell people, you know, to get out of debt, guys, and to keep your payments on things low, because by doing that, it makes it so much easier to get through life, especially in hard times like right now when everything is going through the roof. So the less payments you have, the easier it is to afford the stuff that is going up in price that we have to buy. A lot of people are even saying now the goal isn't even to be rich anymore, you know, like even when I was young, I was like, I want to be rich, you know, like everybody wants to be rich. But now people's financial goals have, you know, been demoted to just surviving and just making sure all of my bills are paid and I have a little extra money left over. That's considered living good now. And it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're somebody that doesn't have to worry about your finances under this environment and this economy, then you kind of are rich. Most people say that they do think that they'll be able to achieve financial success one day, which whatever that means to them, you know, it just means getting out of debt and not having to worry about money anymore is kind of the most people's version of financial success. Unfortunately, 30% of people think that they're never going to get off this hamster wheel, guys. 30% think that they're never going to be financially stable and successful, and it's going to be hard forever. And I hate to say this and sound like cliche, but if you really think that about yourself, then you're more likely to make that happen because you're kind of convincing yourself day in and day out that you're never going to be able to get out of the rut. Like, I know what it's like to have no money, guys, and be broke, but I was always optimistic that I was going to be able to turn that situation around, and eventually I did. But if you just sit there and tell yourself every day that I'm going to be broke forever just because I'm broke now, then that will likely keep you broke. Someone got the Cybertruck. I've actually seen a few of them here in Miami. This is the first time I've seen one in someone's driveway. I think another problem is people just set their standard of living too high, right? Like when you have high expectations and you don't reach those expectations, it's a recipe for disappointment, guys. So like if you start off with low expectations and you achieve it, bump it up a little bit, achieve that, and then you bump it up again and achieve that, well, the next thing you know, after 10, 15, 20 years, you will have achieved a much higher standard of living by increasing it incrementally when you can actually afford it and increasing your income along the way. But the problem is, in today's society, everybody just wants it to turn around tomorrow. Like, oh, I'm not doing well today, so if I'm not doing good enough by, next week or next year, then I might as well just throw in the towel and give up. But that's not the answer. And there's still so much FOMO out there, especially with real estate, guys. I want to cover this a little bit in the next couple of videos because, the FOMO is still just ridiculous. According to the NAR, the home prices have reached new record highs in April of 2024, okay? They're claiming that the median price of existing homes have climbed 5.7% year over year in April to $407,600. And I've kind of covered this before, that depending on which data source you look at, the home prices are all over the map, guys. According to the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, the median home price right now is only $312,000. And according to NAR, it's $407,000. We're talking almost $100,000 discrepancy. So it's really all over the place. So according to the NAR, this is the 10th month in a row of year-over-year increases. This is happening despite the low number of home sales. And this is something I want to drill into people's minds right now that feel like they're never going to be able to afford a house, okay? Here's a direct statement from Lawrence Yun, who is the chief economist at NAR. He says that home sales changed little overall, but the upper end market is experiencing a sizable gain due to more supply coming onto the market. So I have showed you guys this in previous videos that the main reason we're seeing home prices go up still in this environment is because there are fewer and fewer homes that are being sold on the lower end, and a lot of the home sales that are taking place are more expensive properties because the people who can afford to buy those expensive properties are not being nearly as fazed by this economy as the average Joe. And since the median home price is the middle of what homes are being sold for, if more homes are being sold on the higher end than the lower end, then naturally that middle number is going to move up. But it doesn't mean that home prices and the lower end are continuing to explode everywhere, which gives people FOMO, unfortunately. Because we can't forget, guys, that housing affordability for the average person right now is still at basically the worst level ever. And until that improves, the housing market's not going to improve. So you can't be fooled by hearing these stories about, oh, the median home price is still soaring, it's still up 6% year over year. Like, yeah, because half of the home sales that are happening are above like $500,000, $700,000. You know, that's beyond what most people can even afford. So why would you feel FOMO about people buying something that you can't even buy anyways? You know what I'm saying? At least the NAR acknowledges that according to their data, home prices have been falling in 15 of the 221 markets across the United States in the first quarter of 2024. And a lot of these places are in Texas and in Florida due to the huge amount of building and inventory spikes we've been seeing here. And then they're going to tell you like, oh, waiting to buy a home is going to be a mistake because it's going to be more expensive. Well, the only reason it's really more expensive to buy today than it was a couple years ago is because of the higher interest rates. It's not really the prices, unless you live in an area where prices have continued to skyrocket, but that's not the reality for most of us. And I'm going to show you guys here in a little bit how when you price real estate in gold, home prices have actually fallen substantially over the past couple of years. But they're going to say, well, don't wait to buy a home because, you know, if you're waiting for mortgage rates to drop or home prices to drop, you could be waiting for a long time. Once the mortgage rates and the home prices do come down, then it's going to be too late because everything's going to skyrocket, guys. Like, that is the same old story that they use for decades now. And you know, the funny thing is, it's a lie and people still believe it, even though it doesn't actually happen in real life. Because when we look at the last housing crash, we can see even though the interest rates were coming down, home prices were still falling back then, okay? So that's kind of how things work, because you have to understand that when the Fed starts lowering interest rates, it's going to be because the economy is in trouble. And when things are in trouble, people need to offload and sell homes that they can't afford. But there's this whole narrative out there that is the moment interest rates come down by a quarter point, that it's off to the races and people are going to be jumping back into the housing market. They're not, guys, because the affordability index isn't even going to budge when the interest rates come down by 25 basis points, 50 basis points, even 100 basis points. Affordability is still going to be off the charts for most people. So it's not a mistake to wait to buy a house, and I'll show you why right now. When I first started making videos about a potential housing crash, it was at the beginning of 2022. Some people lie and say that I've been talking about this for 5 years or whatever. I haven't even had a YouTube channel for 5 years, first of all. And I had never made my first housing crash video until the beginning of 2022, guys. So it's been about 2.5 years since I've been covering the whole housing market crash scenario. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, if I would have listened to you, Michael, then I wouldn't be able to afford a house now in 2024. You know, I'm glad I bought something before. Well, you wouldn't be able to afford it today because of the interest rates, not because of prices, number one. But besides that, the number one index that people use to reference the most reliable form of data that everybody claims is the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, okay? And if you look at the actual Case-Shiller home price index on a graph right now, you can see that since the market peaked in June of 2022, it was $308,000 for a house back then, and prices have been essentially flat. It has dipped and kind of climbed back up a little bit since then, but only to $312,000. So, you know, $4,000 more expensive 2 years later is nothing, especially with inflation. That's actually, you know, probably going down when adjusted for inflation. And here's the interesting thing I want to ask you. If housing has been flat over the past couple of years in this supposedly booming economy, what do you think is going to happen when the economy is no longer booming, right? That's what people need to start asking themselves and getting realistic about right now, because I've been listening to Peter Schiff's videos lately, and one thing that he mentioned that I never thought about until he brought this up is pricing things in gold. So when you price real estate in gold, you get some very interesting results, guys. According to Case-Shiller, home prices haven't really moved in the last 2 years, right? So if you were to buy a house in June of 2022, priced in gold, gold back then was $1,850 an ounce, and the home price was $308,000, which means you would need 166 ounces of gold to buy a house back then, okay? But if we do that same calculation today, and the median home price is now $312,000, but an ounce of gold is $23.50 per ounce, now it only takes 132 ounces of gold to buy that house, which effectively means that homes are getting cheaper by a wide margin, because this shows you that home prices effectively are going down when adjusted for inflation. People see that the nominal value of the price tag of the house is going up, but that money is now so much more worthless that it doesn't matter. So when you do this calculation, guys, real estate prices have already fallen by 20% in the last 2 years when priced in gold, okay? That shows you two things: that the housing market is already crashing when adjusted for inflation, and it also shows you how much we're all being robbed by inflation. So if you're somebody just hanging on to dollars, you don't own any gold and silver or any other assets, you're getting royally screwed right now, guys. And that's why people say, oh, who cares if you're getting 5% interest in the bank or in money markets or in treasuries, because inflation is much higher than that. And this shows you that, yeah, these people are right. You know, in the last 2 years, home prices have fallen 20% when priced in gold. So if that's the true inflation number, then we're talking inflation has gone up by 10% a year just in the last 2 years. And nobody's getting a 10% return on their cash right now. And when you look at the housing market through this lens and the economy in general of how things are actually getting cheaper when priced in gold, it should be a wake-up call for people. First of all, why don't you own any of this stuff? And it also proves to you that what we're being told is all a lie, guys, how housing is getting more expensive, because it's only getting more expensive priced in dollars, but dollars are being eaten away by inflation each and every day. Whereas gold and silver retains its value with inflation. That's why the price just goes up in times like this. And unfortunately, the longer it takes people to understand this, the longer they remain poor, because if you don't have real money, then you're never going to be able to maintain or retain your wealth. It's going to be constantly eaten away by inflation, and in times like this when inflation is really high, you're losing so much every single year. And I'll bet you the retirees that are not going back to work right now are the ones that own assets, the ones that own gold and silver, the ones that own real estate and are benefiting from this inflation and can now use that to supplement their higher cost of living. Whereas the people that ignored this type of advice, which is just solid financial advice over the years, didn't listen and only have a 401k or only have, CD accounts, are getting royally screwed right now. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.